Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name's Kenna. Subscribe, I would love to have you here. But today I wanted to do a video about traveling, but specifically flying with a feeding tube, because in the past couple months I've gone on 2 flights with, well, I guess technically 4 since departing and returning, but 4 flights with a feeding tube. And going into it, I was so nervous because I had no idea what to expect. I wish there was a video like this out there kind of walking you through what it's like to fly with a feeding tube. So I thought I would make that. I'm also planning on making a whole travel tips with chronic illnesses and feeding tubes. That's going to be in a separate video, likely going up next week. But this one is kind of just gonna walk you through what it's like flying with a feeding tube. So I'm first going to tell you about my first flight with the feeding tube, because the first one going through the airport, TSA, whatever, was something that should not have gone the way it has gone. So I'll tell you what that went like so you know what you shouldn't experience. First thing I would recommend straight out of the bat is to get TSA pre-check. It is kind of pricey to begin with, but it's so worth it and so worth like the less stress, because you don't have to take off your shoes, you don't have to take out all your electronics, and you already are subjected to more searching because of what you're carrying on the plane. So if I would have had to done all of that in addition, I think I would have just been way too stressed. So I recommend TSA pre-check. But in my very first flight, I was not connected to my feeds because it was an evening flight. So I was like, you know what, let me just hook up feeds while I'm waiting for the plane, and I'll just carry just what I need onto the flight, and then I'll like open up everything, set up everything afterward. And my very first trip, it was very short, so I just put my supplies that I needed in our normal checked bag, because I only needed like 4 bottles of formula. So I was like, I'm not gonna create a whole separate suitcase for medical supplies, so I just really only carried on like the 3 bottles of formula that I needed and the supplies. So when I went through TSA, they made me open the bottles of formula that I was carrying on because they were liquid. They're like, you have to open this, and I was like, okay, I didn't know any different. And at the time I was just like, okay, whatever, I'll open it since I'm literally about to open it once I get through TSA. And then they tested it. I don't remember how exactly they tested it this time, but obviously it was fine. I was like, dang, this sucks. So that means if I want to carry more on the plane, then I can't bring formula. I'm like, that's not fair. Like, how am I supposed to carry on more formula if they're gonna have to open it and check it? Because once you open it, the formula is gonna spoil in 24 hours. So I was just like, okay, this sucks. But other than that, going through TSA was completely normal. I just walked through the metal detectors. Nothing went off on my like feeding tube at all. Like, it was all completely normal. So like, the only thing that sucked that first time was them opening everything, and I was like, okay, this, I feel like this shouldn't be allowed, but I just went with it since I was gonna open it anyways. Oh, I also had a doctor's note because we called the flight ahead of time, or like we called the airline ahead of time, and they said to bring a doctor's note, but they never once asked for it. But it was nice to have that security of the doctor's note if I needed it. And then on the returning flight home from that little short trip, I was already hooked up to feeds because it was a morning flight, and I set up my feeds at night and they go through like the next day, and I really didn't feel like unhooking. So it's like, you know what, let me just try going through TSA while hooked up and see what happens. The worst that they're gonna make me do is like stop it and test it and like open it, which is fine because it's already open in my bag. And when I went through, it was actually fine. They just made me like touch the device, and then they like just swipe my hands with something, and then they tested it. So I was like, oh, okay, so now I don't have to worry about going through TSA with like connected to my feeds. Like, you can do that. You can go connected through TSA and it's fine. They'll work around you. So that was nice to know, because usually like flights don't line up around the time I'm about to hook up to feeds. Now let's talk about my most recent trip, which was a much longer trip. This one was 5 days in total. So I would need a lot more supplies. And after my first trip, I learned that you can actually get a free suitcase for medical supplies, whether it's checked or carry-on. And I think you can do both. So this time I packed everything in my separate suitcase, and because it was heavy, it was gonna be heavy with all the bottles of formula and supplies and everything, so I didn't want to make a normal suitcase like overweight, and plus everything wouldn't even fit in it. So I just made a designated medical suitcase. And the way you go about that is you literally just bring it to the airline when you're checking in, and you just say it's a medical suitcase, and you can either check it, or if it's in a carry-on size, you can just carry it on. So when we went for the first time, we checked it. So we just went up, like I said, to check in, and they checked our bag and they took it. away and it was fine. And then I went through TSA like normal, once again hooked up, and all they made me do was just like touch the pump, touch the bag, and then they swiped my hands to check it. And then this time I was also traveling with a wheelchair, and they did the same thing with the wheelchair where they like wiped it down and then they checked it in this little machine that they have to make sure it's like safe. So that was fine. And then they did, however, when I arrived at my place, I went to go like open my suitcase that was checked with medical supplies, and they went through and inspected it, so it was like all in disarray. When I opened it up, I was like, oh, I did not expect them to inspect this, but whatever, it's medical supplies. Just know that if it's a checked bag, they will likely inspect it, so just only put medical supplies in there if you're gonna check your medical bag. Going home now was a different story that I wanted to talk to you about, because this time we carried on my medical suitcase because it wasn't a carry-on size, and I don't know, we were planning on checking it, but then he was like, oh, just carry it on. And I was like, okay. But I still had bottles of formula left over, so I was really nervous because I didn't want them to open it because I didn't want it to spoil. So this was actually a good test. So we went through TSA, and my carry-on, they took it aside, and they open it up and they literally like just go through your entire bag to inspect it and test it and everything. And I was like watching them like a hawk, because I'm like, please do not open that. But then this TSA person actually said, since we don't want to open your bottles of formula because we don't want them to spoil, I just have to go through all of your belongings. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So the first airport that I went to way back when was wrong, because they should not be opening your formula. They are not allowed to, so don't let them open your formula or anything that has potential to spoil. They need to work around it. So just know that. You can also contact someone called TSA Cares if you need to. I don't really have much experience with them, but I know that they exist and I feel like they might be helpful. But just know that they should not be opening your bottles of formula, okay? Not only did they have to go through my entire medical carry-on suitcase, but my backpack. They just had to go through all of that as well. They had to go through like all of my belongings just because I had the medical carry-on with the liquids. Just expect that, because that was a whole big ordeal. And like I said, I was also traveling with a wheelchair, so they had to inspect that bag, they had to inspect the medical bag, my personal bag, the wheelchair, and I was also hooked up to feeds. They didn't inspect that. So TSA, like I said, it's kind of a big ordeal that's going to take longer because of all of this. And that's why I recommend TSA pre-check as well, because it would have taken me so much longer if I had to take out every single technology I had to take off my shoes. I would have been incredibly stressed. I was already stressed going back with all of that inspection that I did not expect, but it is possible. And other than that, like, it really wasn't that bad. It was just, there were like first times for everything on each flight, so I didn't really know what to expect. For my future flights, I definitely feel a lot more comfortable in knowing what to expect. So just know that if you have a separate medical suitcase, they will inspect it. If it's a carry-on, they will inspect all of your belongings and they will like test your hands, but don't allow them to open your bottles of formula. They're not allowed to. Also, just like I said, have a doctor's note just in case. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I should say specifically. Oh, like I said, I went on the plane, hooked up to feeds, nothing happened. Like, it felt exactly like normal. That didn't affect anything. I don't know about any other type of medical devices like central lines or anything. I don't know anything about that. This is just specifically for feeding tubes and what it's like going through TSA and flights and everything. But if you have experience flying with like central lines, fluids, TPN, whatever, I would leave a comment down below to help other people out, because I don't know anything about that. I think that's all. So the biggest things to know: don't let them open your formula. You can get a free carry-on and a free checked bag if it's medical supplies, but make sure you make it only medical supplies, because they will inspect everything and you don't have to do anything ahead of time. Maybe call the airline just for like peace of mind to make sure you can bring a free medical bag. But we went in without talking to anybody and was just like, this is a medical bag, and they're like, okay, yep, and they knew exactly what to do. TSA pre-check, so beneficial. Have a doctor's note just in case, and you can go hooked up to feeds already and everything. Just like I said, just allow extra time for TSA, because it's going to take extra time, because you're going to be stopped, you're going to be checked and everything. If you have any questions, leave them down below. But I really hope this video was helpful and shows that you can travel with a feeding tube, and it's really not too much of a hassle. I feel like when I'm explaining it, it sounds like a big deal, but it's not. It was like 10 minutes of the time, and everything else is like normal. So like I said, if you have any questions, any tips, leave them down below. I hope this video was helpful. Don't forget to give this video a like and a comment and to subscribe for new videos every Saturday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!